So, good morning, Frank, and we are all eager to hear the program today.
Okay, so I just wanted, like I always do, to welcome everybody to the Breakfast Club. I believe everybody that's here knows the history that the Breakfast Club was formed after the 9/11 tragedy to help the individuals that were in transition. Unfortunately, over the years, there's been many subsequent issues that have arisen that unfortunately have affected the job market, the economic downturns, financial crises, pandemics, and unfortunately, most recently, even wars in Ukraine, now Israel. So, along with that, we faced a huge amount of digital disruption. And I hate to call it digital disruption, it is advancement. When we look through history and we look at all the different phases of the industrial revolutions that have taken place, there's been a lot of churn and change, but there's also been a lot of increase in productivity, new capabilities, new functionality to make more efficiency and effectiveness. But, with change comes the need to adapt, to figure out, what we need to adopt. And after we wrote the last book, Mark Beal, who's going to be speaking in a few minutes, and I, we started to look at upskilling, reskilling, and in some cases even de-skilling. What actions you did before. Sometimes there's new approaches. We're seeing it with a lot of the digital and automation technologies like AI, and especially things now like ChatGPT, where some functionality doesn't have to necessarily be done end to end by a human, but pieces of it can be automated. And then, the humans now, nobody has enough time in their workday or even their personal life to do everything. This allows you to get more done by leveraging technology in the right way. As we were working through that, we also did a look back on the first book. And, the things we're seeing, there's always been a multi generational workplace. It's no new thing that we have a multi generational workplace now. But we see that given the influence primarily of digital, that across those different workers from the different generations, they have different value systems. They have different approaches to the way they do things. And I'll tell you from my personal experience, my daughter got done with her undergrad and then she knocked out her MBA, and she had been working for a law firm since, junior year of high school. And she decided after college, with everything being remote, it didn't make sense to do law school at that time because, she didn't want to do it at home via computer. She wanted the experience of being there and really being invested in it. So luckily in her capstone course at her MBA, one of the things she had to do was lead a consulting project on behalf of the university. And she was the PM over the whole project. And at the end of it, they were so impressed with the results. One of the people from the alumni was a senior executive with the firm she's with, and they extended an offer to her. But despite that, I told her, still look out there, see what else there is, and just make sure that, really this is the right fit for you. And it was interesting as she went through the interview process, she was lucky enough to have all the traditional things we talk about, like interviewing skills. She had, thanks to Alex, she had everything around a strong network, and what she started to do is look at other companies like McKinsey and Goldman and, all of those. But she also was able to tap into sources like Reddit. She would tap into, Glassdoor, and the millennial generation is very forthcoming and very open. They put their experiences out there. They openly shared, salaries. They talk very candidly about interviewing processes. And, for a lot of these companies, They even have, standardized testing services that they use where you can even sign up for that testing service yourself and go through the test before you're in the interviewing process with that company. So, it was a real eye opener about all the different ways that, the millennial generation was going about uh, getting their jobs and even targeting companies. The the older generations, go more about this is who I am, this is the type of work I want to do, and they're looking at the job to see which companies are offering it. Whereby from the bottom up, the millennial side is looking at it. Well, I want a company that has this type of mission, that is, into sustainability or whatever their value systems are, and then they'll look to see what jobs they have. So what Mark and I started to do was collaborate on this concept and thinking of really how do we capture this spectrum and all these best practices across these different generations. And we're not saying any approach is right or any approach is wrong or one's better than the next, but we just wanted to make the readers aware of it end to end. So you have that full spectrum of knowledge and awareness of how the different techniques are available out there. And then really you look at it from your perspective based upon your value system, how you feel comfortable approaching things, and then pick from that those things that you feel would be best in your job search. So the book is going to be called Land the Job and Thrive in a Multi-Generational Workplace. And really, it's about bringing forth all of those different best practices, not only from the Breakfast Club for 22 years, but across the perspectives of the different people in the workplace, and really give you that diverse view of how these different approaches can be utilized. And then again, you make the call at the end of the day, what's going to work best for you. But it also gives you a bunch of alternatives. So if something may not be panning out for you, here's something else that you could potentially try in order to get your job search unstuck. But then those lessons are very important because it gives you some of the thought process and the mindset of the different people once you land that you're going to be working with, which is very helpful to make sure that you collaborate well and interface well, even post the landing. So that was the intent, that was the goal. And I'll turn it over to Jerry to introduce Mark so he can give you a high level presentation on it. We're welcome to any type of questions, within the presentation. But the intent here is to really help the job seekers and even those that, are in a company that's, changing over. I know Jerry at his firm, there was a lot of older workers. Now they're bringing in a lot on the younger end. And, there's cultures that have to change, and people have to learn how to really benefit and tap and collaborate across those generations. So I'll turn it over to Jerry, and I thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Frank. Let me just give today's introductions there. Not everybody knows the speakers there, even though I can see the vast majority do. Frank, I'll just give yourself and Mark, I would like to just introduce both of you. So Frank Kovacs has been a technology business executive for more than 30 years, leading and directing large, complex global operations and transformations for some of the largest Fortune 100 firms, as well as NASA. Frank is very proud to capture many of the learnings from 18 years of the Breakfast Club and share them through the book in hopes that even more people will be helped in their respective job search as we all go through the challenges of today's digital disruption and reskilling. I would now like to introduce Mark, our second speaker here. For more than 25 years, Mark has served as a public relations practitioner and marketer for one of the nation's leading consumer public relations agency, developing and executing marketing and public relations campaigns for leading companies and brands around such major sports and entertainment properties as the Olympic Games, Super Bowl, World Series, U.S. Open Tennis, and the Rolling Stones. Today he collaborates with Gen Z as a full-time professor of practice and communication in the Rutgers University School of Communication and Information. Mark co-authored Career in Transition with Frank and is currently collaborating with Frank on the next book scheduled for publication in the spring of 2024, titled Win the Job and Thrive in a Multi-Generational Workspace. Now I'd like to introduce Frank and Mark.
Jerry, thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. So great to wake up on a Saturday morning and see so many familiar faces. I love connecting like this. Of course, in person's great, but this is great as well, just to see again so many old friends and faces, and appreciate the time. And we'll go through this. And as Frank said, and I'm not as used to go to meeting as I am with Zoom, but either text questions or shout them out. I don't get offended as you go through. It won't throw me off. Of course, David, I'm going to try to share my screen here. So let's see if I can do that.
Yeah, I've shared the screen with you or for you.
Okay, give me a second. And you'll let me know, David, if you're seeing it.
So I see full screen, analysis, observations, and best practices.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. Okay. So, Frank, thank you for the intro. Hold on. Thank you for the intro. I appreciate that. Thanks for the setup. That was great. And we'll kind of take you through this. Frank and I will kind of tag team here as we always do. And we'll deliver a few insights here, hopefully some new ones for everybody. I know some folks have heard pieces of this presentation. As Frank said, Frank and I worked on a book together. I think we published this, Frank, in 2019. And we got a really good response from individuals as well as media, got quite a bit of media coverage. So Frank and I actually started in 2020 actually writing this book. Frank remembers it well. He and I were going at it pretty quickly during the pandemic. And so this book has actually been in the works for almost 4 years. But over the last 6-7 months, we've been kind of joined at the hip. And so we've got to get this book out by early 2024, just because, again, as he said, the world has changed, things have transformed. The workplace is quite a bit different than it was in 19, 20, 21, and 22. So the other thing too, you'll see a third name on that cover. We've actually brought in what I call a secret weapon. One of my former graduate students is now a recruiter for one of the world's largest marketing companies with thousands of employees around the world. And I know some of you, I'm seeing Alex there and others, may have some of those insights from the recruiter perspective. Well, to have a recruiter, as all of you know, who's on the inside, right, an executive recruiter who actually works for a global company, provide insights, I think is just great, because as we all know, when you're in the job search process and the application and interview process, you might connect in the front end with a recruiter if you're one of those selected to continue through the process, but you'd always have those insights, right, from the recruiter as far as how do they make decisions, how do they determine who advances, who out of the thousands of applications, how do they determine the 12 or 15 that even get to round one? And so we just thought it'd be really interesting. So we brought Kadir Porter in, who again is a executive recruiter for what is probably the world's largest sports and entertainment marketing agency called Endeavor. Years ago it was called IMG. And he wrote, Frank, I'm making up a number, but he probably wrote about 30 of the lessons. And again, just to have that perspective of the recruiter in 2023 and 2024, I'll give a little nugget here if you don't mind. I sat down with Kadir back in May and I said, hey, I want to truly understand the recruiter, the internal recruiter, not an executive recruiter on the outside who works with a number of agencies, but the person on the inside at the company. And we sat down for about 3 hours and I just picked his brain over and over and over and over, because I don't have access to that, right? And even if I did, it would be through the application and interview process, right? It'd be very kind of a very formal, very official relationship. Recruiter would bring me in the fold. I would interview once, twice, 3 times, whatever. But to be able to sit with a recruiter for 3 hours and just pick his brain. So what I say here, we don't share on social media, but so he took me kind of.
If I could add one point.
Sorry, Frank. Yeah.
I was going to say, on top of what he brings in his professional knowledge, the other nice thing to help balance out Mark and I was that, he was one of Mark's students, so he's much younger than us, to add that perspective as well from his generation.
And I think, Frank, I may get it wrong, so you can keep me honest, but his wife is also a recruiter for, or she works for Indeed. I think I can't recall exactly, but I know she's also kind of in the business. So she's been our kind of our proofreader slash eyes and ears on the book. So every time we go through another round of revisions, we get the bonus of his wife actually reviews it and comes back with her thoughts. In fact, the image you see on the cover actually was a idea from his wife to really truly show diversity in 2024, diversity in background, diversity in race, diversity in age, and all those kinds of things. So absolutely. So it's just great to have a different perspective, a fresh perspective, a new perspective. And like I said, this is just a little bit of a nugget, so I'll just share it. And again, not for public to share out there, but when I sat down with Kadir, he said, I'll post a job. And by the way, he fills close to 80 to 100 jobs a year for the world's largest marketing agency. That's right. He's filling basically 2 jobs a week. He said, I'll post a job today on our company website. It'll go on LinkedIn. It will go on Indeed. It will go on a bunch of other, job sites. He said, within a week or so, I'll have 1,000+ applications. And he goes, we'll use a little bit of ATS. We'll use a little bit of manual, review. But he said, our goal as recruiters, at least at this company, is to try to find and identify 12 quality candidates for this job. And he goes, if we can find those 12 in the first, I'm making this up, he didn't say this, but in the first 12 resumes we see, we don't look at the other 988. So that was a really interesting insight, right? The fact that the goal, or at least the initial wave, is find 12 to 15 quality resumes for the job, even though 1,000+ have applied. He goes, we're not manually looking at 1,000+ resumes. Again, we use a little bit of applicant tracking system. So that was an interesting insight. And then I said, what if I called you, or Alex called, or anyone else on this line called and said, hey, I see you've posted a job. I've got a candidate. He said, that person will go to the top of the list, because he goes, I know you've got some data and some stats, and I'll have a slide here. And most of you know, I'm a big believer in what I call be a 7%er. But he said, believe it or not, I rarely get a phone call. Rarely do I get a recommendation. Rarely do I get a reference. He goes, it's not as often as you think. I don't get, 7% of the 1,000 don't come into a recommendation. He goes, rarely do I ever get someone says, hey, I know somebody who I think fits the bill for this job. So he goes, if I do get that, and they do have the right qualifications, that person goes actually to number 1 on the list of the 10 or 12 or 15. So I'll get into that a little bit later, but that was just an interesting insight, right? And we all know this, but that recommendation, that reference, right? Making that connection. And here's someone with one of the world's largest marketing agencies says, yeah, if someone calls, emails me and says, Alex would be the perfect candidate for this job. He goes, that person goes to the number 1 slot. They bypassed 1,000 resumes. So again, just an insight. I think we all kind of know that, but I thought it was interesting to hear that from an internal executive recruiter who says, I never get calls like that. I rarely get an email like that. No one's calling and saying you should interview Alex for the job. Where I thought it was, probably happening all the time. He said, rarely do I get that. So anyway, really excited about this book. 3 to 4 years in the making. Should be coming out sometime around January, February 2024. I think Frank and I probably exchange 50, 60 text emails a day, phone calls, all that good stuff. But it's a great process. It's a fun process, and even us Gen Xers and us boomers, we're still learning every day. We're evolving every day, and someone like Kadir is giving us interesting insights. There's a quote here again. To me, it's an inspiring quote. It's kind of gets me, from George Bernard Shaw. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die. For the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It's sort of a splendid torch, which I've got a hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn brightly as possible before handing it to to future generations, Gen Z and Gen Alpha after them. I thought that was a good theme, because for this book, also it inspired us. We have 166 basically 1 to 2 page lessons in this book. Every book starts with an inspirational quote, whether it comes from Maya Angelou or it comes from a young Gen Z entrepreneur. We've got a quote that starts each and every lesson, and it's relevant to the chapter. And so as we're putting this book together, we're getting inspired by each and every one of these quotes. And so we thought it'll do the same for the audience as well. So as Frank said earlier, we've always had, multiple generations in the workplace, but it's become, a more prominent topic. Just to go back to this, I'd say the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months. I know a lot of you know I speak quite a bit about Gen Z, and I get called in from major companies to speak about that. But starting around February, I started getting calls from leaders of companies, CEOs and CMOs, big companies, who said, I'm not effectively leading the multi-generations. You know, I'm a boomer, I'm a Gen Xer, and I am not effectively leading all the generations in my workplace. So I give them credit, one, for admitting that. And then two, they asked, would you come in and do a 1 hour or 3 hour workshop? And so this thing wasn't once, it wasn't twice, it wasn't 3 times. It started happening. And Frank at the same time said, yeah, we've got to better understand these multi-generations in the workplace today, even though we've always had multi-generations. But generations today, just based on when they were raised, how were they raised, their backgrounds, all those kinds of things, it's just such an interesting dynamic in the workplace. So it was interesting to hear from the C-suite to say, we're not effectively leading these generations. We need help. We need insights. We need more. And so that was another part of kind of why the book came about. So we'll go through that quickly. We'll talk about, kind of generation by generation, the idea that all generations deliver value, whether you're, a boomer, an Xer, or whether you're the new kid on the block, the Gen Zer who just got hired, in June, July, or August of this year. All generations deliver value. And then if you don't mind, we're on the back end, we'll have a few slides about kind of the Gen Z mindset. I know Frank talked about millennials. I'm gonna go deep into Gen Z because of course they're my favorite generation, and I'm an honorary member of Gen Z. But we'll go through a few slides of that and just kind of bridge that to all of us and some insights and things like that. So interesting, and all of us know this, but you could walk into any company today and potentially there could be 5 generations working side by side, whether in person, virtually, via Zoom, whatever it might be, right? Because the youngest members of the silent generation are, in their mid 70s, and the, oldest members of Gen Z are 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. So you could potentially, at a company, have members of the silent generation, boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Zers working side by side. But if you just look at those age ranges, again, born in different eras, raised on different kind of media, right? Different experiences within the workplace, right? All those things, but yet they are connecting and collaborating and working side by side, whether virtually or in person. So it's just a really interesting dynamic. I fall into that Gen X range, and when I teach my students at Rutgers now, they really look at me old when I talk about, when I started my career back in 88, 89, there was no email. We used a thing called a fax machine. Everything was done primarily in person and by phone. And they look at me like I'm like, when did you start your career, right? They think I'm crazy. Now, of course, they're using Slack, and email is even kind of getting old for the younger generation. So it's just even that, like, experiences within the workplace. So we'll kind of dive into that next. And then again, I think all of us obviously have experienced this and have insights around this, so we can all weigh in with our thoughts. Again, just to give kind of a sense, I think we all kind of know this, but I think it's just really interesting when I look at a chart like this that shows, again, we talked about the silent generation on one side and Gen Z on the other, right? Even just, again, since I'm a marketer, just coming at it from a media perspective, right? Quick little nugget, and I think this will put it in perspective. I walked into my class a week ago on a Monday, the day after Taylor Swift was in New Jersey at MetLife Stadium watching Travis Kelce and the Kansas City Chiefs play the Jets. And I walked in and I had over 2 courses, almost 100 students. And I simply, just to show you by raising your hand, just show me, how many of you tuned into this thing called a television last night and watched this thing called NBC? 2 out of 100. 2. So, I mean, it's a little thing, and I know it doesn't have anything to do with work, but Gen Z doesn't actually watch this thing called a television. They don't sit down at 8 o'clock and turn on a certain show. I then asked how many caught some of the highlights both on and off the field of Taylor Swift in the luxury box on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and every hand in the room went up. So it's just a different way of being raised, a different mindset, a different behavior, as I posted on LinkedIn later that day because I found it interesting. If I work at a major media company right now, NBC Universal, Disney, ABC, ESPN, Paramount, CBS, I'd be real scared because the next generation, Gen Z, isn't tuning into, again, a TV. Well, Gen Alpha, who comes after them, who's right now ages 0 to 10, they don't even know what a TV is. And I know I'm sounding dramatic and all that. The point is, we've all been raised in different generations, and that applies to the workplace too, and how we work together and collaborate together and communicate and all those kinds of things, because we all came up kind of during a certain time frame, and the workplace has changed so much. And of course, since 2020, it's changed dramatically, right? It's transformed dramatically. So we'll talk a little bit
Mark,
about that. But yes.
if I
Yes.
could share something similar, your observation is more from their lifestyle, but from a business perspective, I was very interested. We had a couple Gen Zers join my team, and I was talking to them why they were IMing all the time. Why didn't they, sometimes, resort more to email? And they said, "Oh, you mean the CYA tool?" And I said, "You look at email as a CYA tool?" They said, "Yeah, read through some of the emails. It's usually somebody trying to engage someone else in some type of business context and really looking to memorialize it, or get the responsibility from them transferred to the other, or this and that, rather than just really communicating, which is what they feel any tool, whether it be IM or email, be used for." So those is just one sample of something that all of us use every day, but how it's looked upon differently from one generation to the other.
That's a great point, Frank. I think I saw out of the corner of my eye. I think, Eileen, you had a note in there or in the chat. Normally, when I normally present just on Gen Z. So even your point that you made, just how they're consuming content, and I deliver 3-hour speeches on that. You're absolutely right. They're just consuming content, and to Frank's point, they're consuming and communicating even in the workplace using different channels, different methods, and all those kinds of things. And again, we'll get into that. I don't want to focus too much on Gen Z. So I don't want to offend anyone here. Hopefully, I don't offend anyone. But being a Gen Xer, I think I can say this, right? In fact, one of my students who's now very successful at Fenty Beauty by Rihanna, in fact, she's the global brand manager there. And of course, all the students love that because Fenty Beauty by Rihanna is a pretty cool brand for Gen Zers. She came in this week, and I didn't even tell her we didn't compare notes. She basically said the same thing. So again, hopefully I'm not offending anyone on the call here. But I'll call myself a member of an older generation, right? Our mantra, our approach was work harder, not smarter. We took pride in working 7 days a week. We take pride in working all day, all night, right? That was something like Gen Z and younger generations. It's about how do we efficiently and effectively get the job done in in the most efficient time possible, right? It's not about let's spend 12 hours on this. Let's figure out how to get it done using the latest technology, the latest tools, all that kind of thing. So I always say older generations work harder, not smarter. Younger generations work smarter, not harder. They're taking a different approach, right? Using technology to get it done more effectively, more efficiently. So I think that's interesting. And then the bottom there, and she actually, my 26, 7, 8, 9-year-old student who came back this week, she said this. She goes, "I work to live. I work to travel. I work to experience life. I don't live to work." And again, embarrassed to say, but when I had my agency in New York for 30 plus years, I lived to work. I lived to actually go work every day, to work for, to get on that bus at 6 a.m. and not come home until 10 p.m. every night. I'm not proud of that fact, by the way, but it's just a different mindset that goes back to what Frank talked about, just a slightly different mindset, right? And now in 2023 and 2024, we see a lot of that playing out with hybrid work, remote work, right? And we'll get into a little bit of all of that, but that's how much, even the workplace, again, due to the pandemic, but how much things have changed in the last few years. I look at my agency, which still exists now, they don't even have an office anymore. Nobody goes into office, right? Where when I was there, we all went to the 38th floor of the Empire State Building. If you weren't there before 8:30, you were late. And if you left before 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, you were considered taking a half day. That doesn't fly anymore. That just doesn't fly, that mindset, that approach anymore. So we'll get into a little bit of that, into that. There was a pretty good study done where, almost 90% of those in the workplace consider this idea of generational diversity a positive element of work. So the majority of folks like this idea that different generations are connecting and collaborating, right? Almost 90% consider the opportunity to learn from each generation has benefits. Almost 80% think it'll lead to conflict. Absolutely, of course it's going to lead to conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing because out of conflict typically comes solutions and results and other things. So nothing wrong with conflict, right? But absolutely, as Frank just talked about, I think, Frank, you hit it on the head there, right? A 23-year-old and a 53 or 63 or 73-year-old, you bet there's going to be conflict as far as the approach to work, the way they communicate, all those things. But that's not a bad thing. Conflict is not a bad thing, right? Because out of conflict could come some pretty good things. So interesting data points there regarding, again, the multiple generations in the workplace. But I think we all agree with this, and hopefully we do. No matter what generation you're from or what generation your colleagues or employees are from, every generation brings value, measurable value to the workplace, right? And we'll talk about that on the next 3 or 4 slides. But every generation does. Sorry, Frank.
And to add one point there, you really want your team and your workforce to be representative of your client base. Because if not, how are you rightly going to have empathy from those clients that you're trying to connect with on the product or service that you're trying to sell and market to them? So if you're excluding any of those people because of age or any other reason from your work team, you're cutting out your ability to really connect with that market that you're trying to market your product or service to. So there's a great benefit here from making sure that your work team has people representing all of those characteristics of the target population that you're trying to market and sell to.
Excellent point. And also on this slide, I don't care how young or how old you are, we all want respect. We all want recognition, right? It doesn't matter how long we've been in the business. We still want that recognition and respect for the value we deliver to the workplace. So I kind of, grouped a couple generations here, but for those of us who are members of the silent generation or boomers or Gen X, and you know this already, but I think it's important to pull this out. And this is where those CEOs who called me, this is where they needed to understand it because they weren't connecting the dots. What's the value that we bring to the table? What is the value we bring to the workplace? We got a lot of great experience. We've got 30, 35, 40, 45 years of great experience. That includes failures, lessons learned, successes, case studies. You can't buy that. You can't buy that. Younger generations don't have it. They haven't been around long enough. They've only been alive for 25 years, right? We've been working for 25, 35 years. Great experience. So again, if I'm, I'll just point the finger at myself. If I'm a Gen Xer and I'm out there applying for jobs and looking for jobs, I gotta leverage that to my advantage, right? Experience, successes, lessons learned, just all those things, right? Networks. I'm looking here at people on this call. I mean, I'll pick on Alex if he's still there, and everybody else on this call. The vast networks that we've all built over the years. You can't buy a network. You can't buy a network. You can't go anywhere and buy a network, right? It's not available for sale on TikTok. Networks are built through trust, through collaboration, through working together, through shared experiences. That's another thing that, again, members of, I hate to say the word, older generations, we've built these incredible networks. Powerful stuff. And we can lean in on those networks for that next program, the next campaign, the next whatever, right? Talked about insights, lessons learned, case studies. And the last point, I talk about historical knowledge. I get a call, maybe I'm exaggerating, once a week from my old agency where I haven't been full-time there since 2019, so almost 4 years. Hey, who was the client we worked with in 2010, 2011, 2012? What was the name of that former client? Where are they now? Historical knowledge. Again, we've got it, right? So I guess the point here is just on this slide, all of us who might fall into these generations, you can't discount that incredible value, the experience, the successes, the historical knowledge, the vast network, the relationships. I can say this, right? A 24, 25, 26-year-old Gen Zer, a 27, 28, 29-year-old millennial doesn't have that. Not at that depth and not at that. So it's, to me, incredible value. Hopefully everyone agrees. Incredible value. But if we're going, applying, searching, going for a job, I bring all that with me. I bring my network with me to the job. I bring my experience with it. Right? I bring all that. So anyway, I think it's pretty darn powerful stuff. And it's, again, just a piece of what members of these generations, the value they bring to any company, organization, big or small. All right, millennials. I'm looking, I see Ollie here. I don't know if Ollie, I don't mean to age you, but I don't know if you fall into the millennials, but millennials sometimes kind of get a bad rap, but in the workplace, and I don't know if anyone's going to disagree with me, they are the bridge. If that bridge breaks, we're all in trouble. They are the bridge that's managing up and down. They're the bridge between the C-suite, that might be an Xer, a boomer, a silent generation, and the new kids on the block, Gen Z. They've got incredible pressure that they've got on their shoulders right now because they still are managing up to their C-suite, and they want to get there one day, but they've now been empowered to groom, mentor, manage the new 22, 23, 24, 25, 26-year-old. And I'll tell you, if we boil it all down to one generation, so again, if there's any millennials on the call, you guys are the MVPs. You are the MVPs in 2023 and 24. Because without you, to me, every company would break. You are the bridge that's bridging all these generations together. You're at a point where you have enough experience for sure, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years, whatever it might be, that you're moving up the ranks, you're gaining more responsibility, you're managing more people, you're leading more programs and campaigns, but you're still probably reporting to someone who's a Gen Xer or a boomer. And again, you've been empowered, charged, challenged with, by the way, the new guy who just started, get them in line, mentor them, manage them, all those kinds of things. So I've got two millennials, but I've got a millennial son who works alongside he works for a large public company, I'm not going to say it, but a huge company in finance. He works alongside the CFO, who's a Xer like me, but yet my son is a millennial in his mid-30s. In addition to that, he's got to manage and mentor all the new hires they have who are coming in at 23, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when we see each other on a weekend, he'll say, I am in a pressure spot, as are all millennials, because we are up and down, managing up, managing down, teaching, mentoring, but yet we want to get to where that C-suite is. We want to get to that CFO, that CEO. And so we still have to continue to prove ourselves. We still want to climb the ladder. We're not finished yet. We still have another 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years to go. So anyway, if there aren't any millennials on the call when we leave today, you are the MVPs of today's workplace. Without you, companies would fall apart, and I believe that. When I presented this to two companies this summer, one was one of the world's largest jewelry companies with about 100 people in the room. Oh boy, the millennials, when I said this, they were so excited and so proud, and they were pumped when they heard they were the MVPs, and they should be. They really should be. But again, point for any millennials, if you're applying for jobs, you're searching jobs, this is value, right? This is value because you've done this now. You have managed, you have mentored, you have taken the next generation on your way. At the same time, you've led programs, you've led successes, you've learned from your failures, you've reported to the CEO, the CMO, the CFO, and others. So again, just another value, but millennials are the all-important bridge right now, connecting all these generations. And again, if that bridge breaks, companies are in trouble. Gen Zers, I got Gen Z on the next few slides, so I don't want to bore you with the Gen Z on this one. But bottom line is they don't have the networks as vast as older generations. They've got networks, but not as vast. They do not have the experience. You can't at 25 years old, 24 years old, 20. You can't. It's impossible. You have experience. You don't have that kind of experience. You don't have a lot of experience in the workplace, right? You may have launched your own social media company in 9th grade. And by the way, I know a lot of 9th graders who have launched their own companies. But that's not the same experience as being in a workplace setting, being in a corporate setting, even if it's a remote setting, reporting to others, collaborating with others, right? You just don't have all that. But incredible, incredibly tech savvy, digital natives, adopting technology the moment it's out, applying it to projects, programs, campaigns, initiatives, first on college campuses and then bringing those technologies to the workplace. I know I mentioned Slack earlier, and I don't mean to mention Slack again, but it's just an example of a technology that more and more, I think, companies, especially since 2020, are using as a communications channel. But Gen Zers are very comfortable with using Slack, right? And others, as Frank said, DMing and other things to just be more efficient with the communication, getting and collaborating and all those kinds of things. So while Gen Z doesn't have a lot of the things, the valuable assets and experience that older generations have, they've got a different mindset. They love technology. They embrace technology. They've got an incredible entrepreneurial spirit. I believe they're an unprecedented generation of entrepreneurs. And there are entrepreneurs from every generation dating back to the person who invented the wheel. But Gen Zers have technology at their fingertips that we, or I should say me, I didn't have this technology when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. There's just new channels out there. There's new technology out there, right? So they're really interested, they embrace it, and then they want to use that or at least share it or introduce it to the workplace. Hey, have we ever tried this before? Have we used this before, right? And the main reason is because they think it can help get the job done more efficiently, more effectively, and all those things. So I'm going to go into a couple slides here. Sorry, Frank, go.
If I could just add one point on that slide before we move over. It's really, really critical that each of you look at your own networks. Everybody's always looking to build their network to connect to C-level execs, right? That's the big thing. Oh, I'm going to be connected to CIOs and CEOs and COOs. You really got to envision yourself with an arm up and an arm down. You've got to make sure that you're spanning all the generations. I really challenge you to each of you look at your contacts and do a gut check and see how many are from Gen Z, how many are from Millennial. I mean, you'd be shocked at how much richer your network can become if your own personal network spans that generation that we're talking about. Now, Mark has the added distinction of being a professor, so he's constantly, dealing across the generations. And I could tell you when you speak with him and his insights, you could see how much more rich they are because he has that interface across the spectrum. And that's what each of you can really benefit from if you start opening up and consciously looking across your interactions, the teams you build, the network that you're building. Make sure it runs the gamut across these generations, because if you don't have those contacts, you're not enriching yourself from those other perspectives, those other approaches and ways of doing things that, quite frankly, being digital natives and things like that, we just don't have. So by connecting with them and really embracing it and making sure your network runs that gamut, you'll personally be so enriched by it. Good, Mark.
Excellent point, Frank. Excellent point. The other thing too, which I don't know how many of us want to admit this, Alex probably knows this, but I talked about Kadir earlier, who's working on the book. Well, Kadir is he'd be considered a young millennial. He's probably about 26, he's about 27 or 28. But he's a recruiter, full-time recruiter for one of the largest marketing companies in the world. He's the guy who's leading the application, the resume review process and determining the 10, 12, 15 that go on. More and more with each passing year, more and more of these internal recruiters are going to perhaps skew a little bit younger, right? I said the oldest Gen Zers are now 26. There's probably more and more Gen Zers who are now leading the process for filling certain positions of jobs at 26 years old, at 27 years old, to Frank's point. So, all right, let me take you through a couple slides again.
Excuse me, Mark.
Yes.
So there's a question that came in from Anne Marie just a moment ago. Isn't what you just described the definition of a middle manager regardless of age?
Meaning what exactly? Sorry.
So Anne Marie,
Can I
maybe just
field that one, Mark?
Sure,
go ahead.
please. Absolutely, Frank.
Actually,
Okay.
just to clarify
So
the
Anne
comment,
Marie,
it was when
go ahead.
you were referring to millennials being MVPs, which
Oh,
I'm okay if they are the MVP, but I think the way you pitched them seemed a little bit to me the description of a middle manager, the balancing act just happens to be the
I
point in time where they tend to get to this level, to your
yeah,
point,
no,
right?
no, I agree, Emery. And I think obviously even millennials, there's a wide age range there. I think my son's a good example, mid 30s, millennial. He reports directly to the CFO, but he's got a team of 15, 20 in finance who CFO said, you're in charge of these folks. You got to make sure they do their job, right? All those things. So I completely agree. But there's also millennials on the older side who are actually leading companies now, who are the CEOs, right? Who are running companies. So that's why I say they're kind of in this interesting position where they continue to advance. But yet, in many cases, to your point, that's why I said they're managing up and they're managing down. But there's plenty of millennials out there who are actually leading the company now, and a CEO, CIO, CEO. Sorry, Frank.
So I would say, Anne Marie, exactly what Mark said, but a little bit different. When you look at middle managers typically, not all the time, are within a certain age range. And that age range right now overlaps heavily with the millennial age group, right? But it's different than it has been historically because of digital. Because on one side, you've got your people in the C-suite and all that are normally Gen X and boomers. And then you've got the Gen Zs at the younger, more entry level positions that are the digital natives. And the millennials kind of got the best of both because they've been working for the boomers and they understand the digital side to deal with the Gen Zers. So with technology being so pervasive through every profession now and new approaches in ways we do things with automation and digital ecosystems and everything else, them being in their level of exposure to both ends of the spectrum is so critical to helping get these solutions designed and architected appropriately and getting them deployed and grabbing the mind share and the institutionalization of those solutions at the workplace that really wasn't there years ago. Years ago, there was a way of doing things, and it was more capturing the rules, the logic, the processes of how things done. Now, work is being reinvented. Total job occupations are going away. Brand new occupations are coming to the marketplace. So there's that much more churn, and having their unique perspective of being in between the boomers and the X on one side and the Zs on the other side, it's actually a more demanding role than it's ever been. So that's how I see what's going on right now in the marketplace.
Great question. Love that, Emery. I completely agree. We'll go through a couple of slides here. Again, they're through the Gen Z lens because, as Frank said, I do have I do call it a privilege, but every week I'm collaborating with about 150 to 200 Gen Zers, both those who are currently juniors, seniors in graduate school, as well as those who recently graduated and either secured their first full-time job or in the process of securing their first full-time job. So I collaborate with many of them in helping them secure jobs. And so we'll take you through that a little bit. For those who've heard me present, this is always a theme, but each and every one of us is a brand. We may not be as big a brand as Taylor Swift yet, but the point is we are a brand. I think we all kind of know this. I know Alex teaches this a lot. So we need to take ownership of our brand as the CEO and chief marketing officer of our brand every single day. Especially if we're in that, well, I don't even say especially, but again, if we're in the job search process or we are at our job, we've got a brand. We need to market that brand. But, while we've got groups like this who will help us every day of the week, we still have to make the decision every morning. how do I want to market my brand today? What am I going to do? Am I going to go to that networking event? Am I going to go to a Saturday morning event like this, right? Am I going to go out and have cup of coffee meetings? Only we can make that decision. We have lots of folks who are our allies, but only we can make that decision of where am I going to take my brand today, and how am I going to amplify my brand across what I call the 3 C's: content, channels, and connections. I don't think I have it in this lecture. Sorry, I'm thinking I'm in my class. I don't think I have this presentation, but Serena Williams, who I worked with since she was about 17, she says, I work on my brand every single day, right? She doesn't consider herself just a tennis player or just a mom. She works on her brand every single day. David, did I see Anne Marie? I think I saw a question on the chat.
So there's a question from Anne Marie. There's another one in a moment following that. From Anne Marie, what is the typical age at which people are getting, oops, someone just scrolled away. Sorry about that. What is the typical age at which people are getting their first career job or role?
Oh, great question. So Anne Marie, by the way, thank you for the question. Again, separate from teaching and consulting with companies, I spend probably 7 days a week helping all my students get their first job as just my way of giving back. I don't get $1 for it. It's just my way because I'm a bad person in real life, so I have to do something good. And so I've placed about 2,000 students in their full-time jobs over the last 10 years, 12 years. And currently, most of my students, when they graduate in May, are 22 or 23. If they go to grad school, they may go to grad school for a year or two and maybe still intern and all that, so they might be 25. But like currently, I've got one of my students who graduated, was in the 5-year master's program, got his master's degree this past May, and on Monday, he's in the final interview for a PR position at, I'm not going to name the company, but one of the world's largest media companies. He's made it through round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, and he and I had a call on Monday, and he goes, I made it to the finals, and again, you all know the company, I'm not going to tell you who it is, and I said, well, if you're in the finals now, my college roommate is a national news anchor for this media company that you're going to. I will get you on the phone with him today. He spent 2 hours on Monday with this, I'm not going to tell you the name, a national television broadcast news anchor who spent 2 hours basically helping him prepare for Monday's final interview, giving him all the insights of the media company, giving him all the key kind of watch outs and things like that. So I'd say right now, 22, 23, 24, right in there, depending on if they're maybe going for another year or two of grad school. And so those are those Gen Zers, right? Because the oldest Gen Zers turned 26 this year. So they're still, I would call them still the oldest members of Gen Z, ages 22, 23, 24, 25. Gen Z goes right down to age 11. And then after them, get ready, buckle up, is Gen Alpha, age 0 to 10 right now. I've got 6 Gen Alpha grandchildren, and they are, we thought Gen Z was tech savvy. Get ready. Gen Alpha is really tech savvy. They're amazing. I've got a 7-year-old who I am amazed at every day of what he's doing on Roblox, what he's doing on YouTube, what he's doing on TikTok. Yeah, 7 years old. Was there another question, David?
Yeah, actually, it's from Alex Freund, and he has a comment that he would like to discuss.
Absolutely.
Alex, if you want to unmute.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Mark. Mark, something I didn't want to interrupt you earlier, but you mentioned something I think is very, very important. You said the follow-up. Don't just apply. The follow-up is very, very important. And this reminds me, a good painter, first of all, puts primer, and then brings the paint. Okay, you don't put the paint, first of all, the primer. But I'm reminded of a situation I had 2 decades ago. I applied at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. I had exactly what they needed, but they didn't touch base with me. I called the hospital administrator's office. The administrative assistant said, call Anne in HR. She's recruiting for this. Tell her I sent you. Thank you. Immediately I called her. This is what she said. We received 120 applicants. I opened the first 20 and I selected 5. I will never forget this sentence. So this is in support of what you just said.
Thank you.
120 applicants. I opened the first 20 and I called in 5. She called me in. I had an interview. So that's my first comment. So important to follow up. The second thing is this, and I remember vividly, Frank mentioned years ago, I had Juliana, Frank's daughter, with interview preparation. And I want to tell you, I talk to her very, very differently than I talk to older people. I do something that my wife warned me several times not to do. Don't ask a woman her age. I often do. And I'll tell you why, because I compartmentalize my clients. I don't talk, it's not one size fits all. When I talk, for example, with Gen Z, these are really the kids that just got out of college. They have no work experience. They cannot say 20 years I was a VP in bank. No, they were not. So I give them a very different material than others. My most interesting that I personally enjoy, this is Gen Y, the millennials. These are the 26 to 41, and also they're bordering with Gen X, which is 42 to 57. They have what I call an itch. And by the way, I have two kids, and I know because I talk to them daily. Mm-hmm. What is this itch? This itch is they want promotion. They have some past, and they still have a long runway to go. They have an itch. They want promotion. So again, it's very important to give the people what they need. And last thing I want to mention, and I want to show you, I read this book. I don't know how many of you know this. It's written by Gail Sheehy. It's called New Passages. And the tagline is Mapping Your Life Across Time. She interviews 5,000 people around the globe, and she put them into gender, male, and ladies and men, male, and then female, and then she talked about what goes on in their head. How are they thinking? I read this book all the time because when I work with someone, I need to understand your thinking. It's not what I want to give you, it's what you need from me.
Love that. Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Just a point, I'm going to build on one of Alex's point. Just yesterday, I had a 1-hour call with a former student who's now 27, 8, or 9. So he's a millennial, and he's doing really great work in the marketing public relations field. Works for the world's second or third largest public relations agency, so a company that has almost 6,000 employees around the globe. And about 6, 7, 8 months ago, a number of his managers, bosses, whatever you want to call it, they all left to go elsewhere, and so he was given lots more responsibility. So he was managing, to Anne-Marie's point, he was playing up, managing up. And, you know, you're going to get a great promotion when the time comes. You know, September 1, you're going to get a great promotion because you helped us get through this tough time with 2, 3 of your bosses left. Well, September 1 came and went, and they said, oh, yeah, you're not getting the promotion. So to Alex's point, he's like, well, told me back in February, March, April when I, you know, took on a much bigger load and had other responsibilities above mine. So he called me at Alex's point and said, I'm going to find another job. You know, they told me I was going to get promoted. I didn't get promoted. I feel like I've done great work here. I've delivered value. And so now he's in the finals of a very big high profile job. And it just so happens that if he gets the job, his boss is a former employee of mine who I hired 25 years ago. So we did a long call yesterday to get him ready specifically for the interview he's going to have with his potential boss, who I hired 25 years ago. So, but the point that Alex made is I was fully aligned with this millennial for moving on. You know, I said, get the job before you, don't leave your company yet. But the point was he should have. So, all right, a couple more slides on this one. Again, just some themes here. I do believe Gen Zers are an unprecedented generation of entrepreneurs. We've had entrepreneurs for hundreds, thousands of years, but they've got tools and technology that previous generations just didn't have, and they can leverage that, right? Sophie Kleinberg was a sophomore in high school She's now a sophomore in college, but when she was a sophomore in high school, she made homemade, handmade jewelry. And because of the technology that she sought and found, she sold her handmade jewelry in Asia, Europe, South America, all from her little apartment with her dad, who I know really well, in Queens, New York. You couldn't do that 20 years ago. You couldn't do it. We didn't have the platforms. We didn't have the e-commerce platforms, right? But as a 16-year-old sophomore in high school, she launched a global company. I don't care whether she made $1 or $1 million. The point was she had that entrepreneurial spirit. She leveraged technology, and she was selling her jewelry around the world. I wish this was that quote. It's not. I love this quote. It kind of ties to a few of the things that Frank and Alex are talking about. Gen Z is the first generation that swipe before they wipe. This comes from the former CMO of MTV. The point is, they've had technology in their hands since the age of 1, 2, or 3. They are very comfortable with technology. They adopt technology. They use technology for all types of things, including Sophie, who launched a company as a sophomore in high school. But when they come to the workplace, as Frank said earlier, they're always thinking about what technology might help us get this job done. And all of us should try to have that kind of tech mindset of embracing, learning, different types of technology that's coming out. How potentially could ChatGPT help me, right? How can it help me with my job search? How can it help me, whatever it might be? So instead of, I guess, the old kind of putting the hand up and saying, I don't want technology or I'm not going to embrace it, Gen Z's mindset is bring it on. I want to learn it. I want to test it. And if it's something I can use, I'm going to use it. We're all content creators on this call. We've got a lot of channels out there. I follow a lot of folks on this call on LinkedIn, and I love it. Gen Z, as I said earlier, they don't use traditional channels, but they're really good at content creation across a number of channels. I have Gen Zers in college who have their own podcast. I've got Gen Zers who write blogs. I've got Gen Zers who have YouTube channels. The point is, we all now have these channels, and I know a lot of you use them fully, but the point is we've got a lot of channels out there, and we can all be thought leaders. We can all be content creators, especially if we're in that search for that next job. There's others on this call who know this better than me, but I would think after an interview or two, that recruiter is probably going to go back and say, well, let's see what this person's doing on LinkedIn. Let's see if they've got a podcast. Let's see if they've got a blog, right? What is their thought leadership? What are they writing? So we can all be, thought leaders. In my classes, and I don't want to get too deep about this, but we talk about what's called the PESO model: paid media, earned media, shared media, owned media. Well, all of us have what's called owned media. We may not use that term. I don't think Alex goes around and says, hey, did you see what I put on owned media? No. Well, owned media means we have channels that we own, in which we're the publisher, we're the editor, we're the journalist, right? And we can produce as much or as little content as we want. But in today's world, thought leadership content engages audiences. It engages recruiters. It engages folks in our network. So Gen Z does this really effectively and really well. LinkedIn, I don't even know to go into this, but bottom line is, right, LinkedIn has transformed so much. I know you have ongoing sessions around LinkedIn that everyone here is involved in and participates in. It's just transformed so much. I mean, I think there's some people hopefully will agree with me in this call. I can remember LinkedIn 10, 15 years ago where I met you and you met me at a conference, we connected and we never talked again. And that was kind of what LinkedIn, at least to me in the old days, was, right? Hey, we met each other at that conference, let's connect. We never spoke again. Now it's thought leadership, it's collaboration, it's connection, it's creating connections with folks who might be at that target location where I want to get to, right? It's all those things. So obviously Gen Z is leveraging LinkedIn. This is just a headline that I love, probably more from a marketing presentation, but this is from Ad Age. Gen Z doesn't want to buy your brand, they want to join it. I apply this to the workplace and seeking a job, right? Gen Zers, they have certain companies that they target that they love because of, as Frank said earlier, they're purposeful companies or they're doing good things in the community, right? Patagonia is the first company they'll all mention as like a great company for contributing to a better society and all that. But the point is, as they go look at potential jobs, it's become more of that's where I want to be. I want to be, at that company, as opposed to I just need a job, right? So the mindset of where do you want to take your experience, your successes, your lessons learned, and where do you want to join? Where do I want to join? As opposed to just, well, I'll just take any sort of job out there. I think we all see this, yeah, competitive salary, competitive benefits still really, really important to everybody. But over the past few years, especially after the 2020, mental health. I've got more students now graduating in 22 and 23 who, when they call me and say, I got the job that you helped me with, first thing they'll say, not everyone, but many, they're giving me mental health days. No one said that in 2017 or 18 or 19. Maybe we called them sick days, maybe we called them PTO days, but they're actually designating certain benefits as mental health days, one a quarter, one a month, whatever it might be. This balance of a couple days in, a couple days out, or completely working remotely, that's really important to them. It's something that they prioritize. I've got one former student who's now probably 26 who said, I go into the city 2 days a week, but 3 days I don't. And she goes, on those 3 days, I actually start working earlier because I'm not on the train or the bus. So actually I start my workday around 7 or 7:30. But because of that, at noon or 1, I can actually go work out for an hour, hour and a half, take a walk, take a run, go work out. And mentally, she goes, it just recharges me completely. She goes, I can't do that in the office. So she goes, I love that balance. And I always want to keep that balance of a couple days in for face-to-face. But I love that idea of 2 or 3 days of no train, no bus, no wasting that time. And so at least for the Gen Zers who I know who are out there now, they really love that kind of middle space. I mean, of course, there's some who would love to just work remotely full-time, and there are many doing that. And there's some who might want to go in 5 days a week. I haven't heard of any yet, but there may be a couple. This is that data point that I shared earlier, and I think this number is actually very high. This was a University of Michigan study. I share this a lot. It goes to the point that Alex made about calling up. It goes to the point of, the recruiter who I mentioned gets 1,000+ resumes, but as Alex said, he's really looking for just 12 really good ones. So University of Michigan had a study pre-2020. Only 7% of those who apply for a job, and that's why I say I think that number's high, because the recruiter I told you said he never gets these calls, comprise, the applicant. So if there's 100 applicants for the job, 7, and I think that number is really high, I think it's maybe 1, will have someone make a recommendation, a reference on their behalf to the recruiter, to the hirer, whoever it might be. But ultimately, 40% of the hires come from that small pool of those 7%. So I always say, be a 7%er. Maybe I should say be a 1%er, because as Kadir said, he goes, I get 1,000 applications. He goes, I rarely get anybody calling me or recommending someone, rarely. And if they do, they go to the top of that list. The other point here, which I think we're all big believers in, we know we talk and hear and read a lot about AI, and AI is not going away. And again, like Gen Z, we should learn about it and how can it apply and how can I use it to my advantage. But huge believer in HI, human interaction. And I think human interaction is kind of what we're doing here. It's the idea of, okay, there may be applicant tracking systems and all those kinds of things, but ultimately, somewhere in this process, there's going to be a human talking to a human. May not be the first interview, maybe it's not the second interview, but somewhere there's going to be humans involved in the decision of who they're going to hire. Real quick story. I know some of you have heard this, but I just want to share it again because I think it was a powerful story. I was asked to be the keynote speaker for the New Jersey Digital Marketing Conference back in May, first week of May. They held it at Monmouth University. They've got a theater there that holds, I think, 500 or 600. So they had about 350 people there, which was a pretty good crowd because this conference had not taken place since 2019, pre-pandemic. So 2020, 21, 22, they just didn't have it. And they asked if I'd serve as keynote, but also a host, which is kind of a different role for me. So they wanted me to all day be kind of the host, MC, all that. And when I looked at the agenda, I saw, they had the CIO from Goya Foods coming in, and his whole presentation was on AI. Then they had senior executives from Twitch coming in, senior executives from Amazon coming in, and they were all talking AI. And so I said, whenever I make a speech, I always try to figure out what's my opening line, what's going to get the audience hooked. And I walked out on the stage in front of 300, 400 people, and they said, we've got a whole day of great speakers, and a lot of them are going to talk about AI. So for the next minute, here's what I want to do. Let's all engage in HI. Most of us haven't been at a conference in 2, 3, 4 years. For the next minute, turn to your right, turn to your left, turn behind you, turn in front of you. Shake hands, fist bump, elbow bump, whatever you want to do. Introduce yourself to the person sitting next to you. 5 minutes later, they were still doing it. 5 minutes later, they couldn't get enough of HI, meaning connecting, collaborating, face-to-face, human interaction, all those kinds of things. So again, I'm a huge believer in HI. It's not going away, no matter how high tech we get. It's not going away. Alex raised a good point earlier. He submitted that application. They chose, 10 or 12 out of the 100 plus, but because he picked up that phone and made a phone call and got a human on the other end and got a name on the other end and then engaged that person, that's HI. There's nothing technology about that. That's just good old proactive HI. So that's it. Thank you very, very much. Love the collaboration. Love all the questions. And maybe more questions. David, should I stop sharing this so we can all go on one screen?
Sure, you're welcome to do so. Yep, that's fine. And so, folks,
So,
we're
Mark,
not. Yeah,
if
go ahead.
if I could just make one point before we get into that. Really, I'm happy that you're all here today. I've had conversations on this topic with David and Jerry, but I like to, so to speak, eat my own dog food. We have a network here. We've had it running now for 22 years. We've helped a ton of people land jobs. We've had a lot of people, reach retirement age, relocate. And what I'd like us to do is to take on a challenge among all of us. I've asked David and Jerry, who lead our speaker committee, to really look out there for, new speakers, new topics, things that would really engage a multi-generational audience specific to job search and career management. And, what I need from each of you, if you know of any good presentations or presenters, that we could tap into, please make Jerry and David aware of that. But each of us, through family, through work, through, just connections, we know a lot of millennials and Gen Zers. We should be inviting them to these meetings. So I'd really like you to go out of your way to think for the next meeting and, the meetings thereafter. Could you identify one, maybe two people? If you can find more than that, that's great. Even Mark, if you could publicize this, within Rutgers and your classes to your students, because this networking group would be that much stronger if we represent what we just talked about and really engaging across that spectrum of these different generations to bring the people together, bring those perspectives together, and really grow TBCNJ back to where it was, 20 years ago. We took a hit like most of the networking groups from the pandemic. We're looking to get back into, face-to-face meetings, and we'll probably always keep the virtual aspect, just to help out those that may have gone to a new geography or may not, for whatever reason, be able to join. But, all of these venues require to rent a room. And quite frankly, unless we have the numbers, I can't personally take on the liability that, here's going to be the expense, but nobody's going to show up, to the extent to be able to cover the fee of the room. So let's really make the network better. That's the first and foremost thing. Let's grow our ranks. But please, if you can bring one, two, or even more people to the next meeting, work with Jerry and David if you see good presentations, good content that you think will do that. Because we have to walk the talk. We have to sit there and really focus on it and invest on it in growing our ranks here. So anything each of you could do to help would be very much appreciated. And I'll throw it back to you, David and Mark.
Sorry about that. My mic was off. Yeah, thank you, Frank. Frank, I know you and I talked about it, and you've talked with others, as you've mentioned. It's a little bit of a challenge for us. So, yeah, great that anyone else can help us find additional terrific speakers that we can talk on this topic and others. Thank you. So before we wrap up, I want to let you know, even once we do formally end the meeting, we are going to keep this session open so we can chit chat a little and have some virtual networking. But before we do, any other questions for Mark? And if you do, at this point, just unmute, make sure you don't step over someone else who's talking. Mark will be happy, or Frank will be happy to address your questions right away. Any thoughts, folks, before we wrap up? Going once, going twice.
Hey there, if there are no other questions, I posted a couple in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed.
No, that's okay. That's okay. The conversation was going, the presentation was going, so that's good. So I noticed that Mark, you had one of your, I guess one of your students posted their post. It looked like it's from LinkedIn that said where they were going to join. And I guess, you know, I've seen this with a couple of the younger generation, but they're posting it before they're in the door. And I was wondering if you thought that that was actually a good idea.
Well, you're absolutely right. Great question, by the way. I do think it's a great idea, but typically what they'll do is once they officially have the job, or have, in her case, it was an internship with the New York Knicks, they socialize it, they tell the world, right? So typically it's once paper signed, official. Maybe they haven't started on day one, or maybe it's they have started. I think it's a good idea for a couple of reasons. I think it's kind of mutually beneficial. One, they're socializing their success. They're socializing they won the job, they got the job, all those good things. And as that one that was there from Shelley, she's also thanking and praising the recruiter, the HR, the this, right? The people that gave her the job. So when I see that, she's promoting her brand. She's sharing where her brand is going next and all that, which is great, again, which we talked about, content and channels. But to all her Gen Z friends and Gen Z classmates, like, wow, never thought of Madison Square Garden for a job. Hey, look at that. I mean, so it's to me, it's also shining a light on this employer, whoever the employer is, and opening that employer up to potentially other great talent that wasn't aware that I could go work there or do that. So I like kind of how I think it helps both sides. I think it's even, to your point, Emery, more powerful when they're maybe a year into it or 2 years into it, and they're like, just had my 1 year anniversary, just had my 2 year anniversary. I have a student who now is probably 7 years at Amazon out at the corporate headquarters in Washington. And of course, I'm going to get the name wrong, but what do they call it? Their Amazon-versary or something like that. But anyway, she is, she puts out thought leadership content where she's just constantly praising her employer, the company, her colleagues, or this. Every time I read them, like, man, I got to go get a job there, right? So when you have advocates like that who work at a company, and then they on their own are just socializing their great experience at that company, big or small, I think it opens eyes to, again, maybe other folks who never considered that particular company. So I like it on both sides of the fence. I like the individual kind of continuing to share where they are in their journey and sharing that with their audience, but also that it shines a positive light on the company that they work for.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Great discussion.
Yes, I actually do have a question there.
Comment. Oh, Jerry, you wanted to speak first? Go ahead.
No, Alex, you go first.
Yeah. Two things. And again, I am saying this because I want to be helpful to you. Tuesday, I received a letter from a lawyer asking for $1,500 because 10 years ago or so, I used some pictures that I did not get written permission for. So immediately, within 24 hours, I hired a lawyer. So I want to warn you, you are my friends. I want to warn you, be very, very careful what you publish. There are some people out there looking for something you did wrong and collecting money from you. I heard other people were asked to pay $5,000. I don't know how I will end up paying, but I hired a lawyer, an IP lawyer, to protect me. So that's message number one. Message number two, yesterday at the Princeton Public Library, Ken Lang had an incredibly nice presentation about LinkedIn. And he was saying that you need to get out there and be active on LinkedIn. And I agree with him. But every coin has two sides. I believe more, instead of the push, I believe in a pull. You need to become a magnet. And allow me to use myself as an example. Exactly an hour and 22 minutes ago, I published something on LinkedIn. I just looked at it now, and 93 people already looked at it. I have 93 impressions. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So I created this group of people that when I write something, people react. That's what you want to do. Pull people to you instead of begging for a job and a connection.
Alex must have been sitting in my class this week because the lecture this week was the difference between push and pull marketing. So I think Alex was there. I didn't see him, but he might have been in the back there. So that was actually funny, just timely. We talked about push and pull marketing, pre-LinkedIn, pre-channels, pre-social media. It was really about, it was push marketing. But to Alex's point, you want to pull people in. You want to engage people in. So thanks for sitting in class this week, Alex, and bringing that lesson to life. I love that.
So, Mark, I would share one point. I don't know how much others have encountered this, but the corporation I work for actually has a social media policy for employees. So they actually instruct us certain things that we should refrain from posting on social media because they feel as employees of their firm, we're an extension or to a great extent represent them as well. So I would just suggest before you post anything, if you're engaged with your employer, just make sure that you understand if they have a social media policy, and if so, what you have to do to make sure that you're in compliance.
Great point.
It's very critical.
No, great point. I still consult with a Fortune 100 company on a daily basis, and I actually, with their lawyers, develop and design the social media guidelines, and then we revisit those pretty much every quarter. And so to your point, they're very, for this particular company, they're very detailed about what you can and can't post on social media. Jerry?
Yes, Mark, I did have a question. I want to make a comment first and then ask you a question, and it has to do with, you talk about multi-generational. One of the things that I've noticed between generations, especially a lot of times generations that have been working a while versus new people that get hired, is that a lot of times they shut their ears and don't listen and learn from the other generations. So they make decisions about them first, and they lose out on the knowledge that that individual has and what they take to the game. My comment to you is, the people you work with, the Gen Zers, what is their sense in general about that? Because yes, they have a lot to give, but they also have a lot to learn, like all of us do. I just want to ask.
Completely agree with you. I mean, I don't want to paint with a broad strokes here for any generation, right? We're all a little bit different, no matter what generation we're a part of. We all operate differently. I will say that for the most part, Gen Z is incredibly, for lack of a better word, inclusive, and they're like sponges. Like they want to learn. Like they want to learn, Jerry, what teach me, Jerry, right? I'm not saying every Gen Zer is like that, just like not every Gen Xer is like that, but at least the ones that I, again, collaborate with on a regular basis, past students, current students, like I said, they proactively teach me. I want to hear, I want to learn, I want to this. I know some of these things really, really well, but I don't know everything that Jerry, kind of thing. So, but again, not everyone is like that, but for the most part, that's what I'm seeing from them is, and that's why I end up, I say 7 days a week, and it's true. I'm not sure when my next call is, but 7 days a week, I'm having these 1 hour Zoom sessions with Gen Zers who just want to better understand, even what we're talking about today. How does the recruiting process work? How do I build my brand? How do I market my brand? How do all those kinds of things? So at least that's my experience, but not every single person's the same way.
And Mark and I have helped a lot of people over the years. Rod Cologne used to call it a master connector. We basically are willing to open up our network and our connections and help others connect. But, the big thing is over the years, Mark's had all these students. I've had, so many, not only many of you, but even some of your children, that we've helped. But the big thing is you can give a person a fish or you could teach them how to fish. And all I would recommend to you is that you've got to get these, younger members of your families, whether they're Gen Zs or millennials, engaged, because if they don't know how to build that network and you're not going to be there to help throw them, the connection, what are they going to do when you're no longer there to do that? So it's really, really critical that they learn these lessons. Like Right now, I have at least a dozen young people. One guy graduated from Quinnipiac as the top of his class, and now he's going to new school. I've got a former neighbor's daughter who is at CVS, and she's in tech there, and now she's considering going back for machine learning. I've got all of these people down there, and try as I may to get them to see the value in joining a networking group, here and there, they'll attend a session, but they don't become, regular attendees. But it's extremely critical. My daughter Juliana, the people just say to her, "How could you ever have 18,000 LinkedIn contacts?" And luckily, even when she went to Seton Hall and was in the leadership program, one of the things they did there is those students met one-on-one with alumni who were CEOs of things like ShopRite, Cigna, and all these large corporations. So she not only has contacts, but she has at least 60 CEO leaders out there that know of her, worked with her, helped mentor her. And, the rest of these kids really need to plug into that. It's all about the 6 degrees of separation. And I could tell you story after story how I've seen that 6 degrees unfold and really help people. And, that's what they're missing. When Mark said, yeah, they have the digital skills and they've swiped before they wiped, but they're missing out on a lot of those key foundational building blocks, like building a network, understanding the 6 degrees of separation, having the people that could put those recommendations and endorse their skill sets on the LinkedIn profile. That's the value of why they have to come to the networking group, is to really establish and extend their brand. And they're not necessarily seeing that or prioritizing it. And really, that's where each of you could be the ambassadors. I'm sure you have family, friends, etc., that you know of that would greatly benefit from it. So if you could just plug them in. I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm trying to engage them in hearing the message, even through a forum like this, so that they could sit there and really benefit from it. And Mark and I could tell you, you don't write a book to become a millionaire. We wrote the book because of the content and to share it.
Yeah, thank you. So folks, while Frank and Mark are both on the line, any other questions for our presenters today? I know there's been a little bit of activity in chat, so folks, I'm glad you've been able to do that.
Looks like Michael has a question.
Yeah, Michael, your hand went up, so unmute and please ask.
Okay, I may be off topic, so please accept my apologies. This week I found out I was being let go from my job. I was a member of the Breakfast Club many years ago. Unfortunately, I moved on with my life and didn't include networking. Was wondering if I can get some advice on how to start over again. Should I be reaching out to my LinkedIn contacts? Is that too pushy? How do I begin? I've been out of work 2 days, so I'm just trying to figure out how to start over again and get my job search moving in the right direction.
So you have
I
to.
think it's right on topic. I'll leave it to some of the experts on here to discuss. But perfect topic for today.
You want to target companies, Mike. So you want to see where there are positions open that you're qualified for, and you want to look at what companies you have interest in. And then it's much easier, like let's say I'm in job search and I found a job that I'm interested in, and then I see that Mark currently works there. Now, I'm not just coming to him and say, hey, Mark, I'm out of a job, what can you do for me? I'm instead saying, Mark, I'm out of the position right now, but I found this great job. Here, I've done my resume and made the case with it specific to that opportunity. Here's my T letter that's gone through the job position and looked at each and every requirement. And here on the other side of the page, it shows how I have the skill set, the knowledge, the education, that I'm fully qualified for it. I was wondering if you'd tell me a little about the organization, the culture, how things work there, what level this is, what the pay is related to it, and start the conversation like that. You never want to ask for the job, but in the normal course of conversation, if Mark feels that, hey, it looks like he's got everything we need, and yeah, I think he'd make a good person for the team, he in turn will say to me, well, I happen to know the hiring manager on this, and give me all that information, send it over to me, and I'll see what I could do for you, making an introduction. But you always want to start with something very concrete, because if you go just open-ended like that, if I went to Jerry and say, hey, Jerry, is there any jobs at Prudential? Jerry's going to say, we've got a lot of jobs, but, do you expect Jerry now to take your resume, read through it, and try and match it up against all those jobs and filter it down to a few that somehow appear to him to be a match for what you're looking for? Unless you and Jerry are really, really good friends for a long time, I don't think he's going to, take that on for you. But, Indeed.com is very good because you can look at where you live. And if you're only willing to go, let's say, 10-mile radius, 20-mile radius, whatever it may be, you can then see all the jobs that are within that radius of, where you live, and look at the companies that are related to that and start targeting them. Then you take those targeted companies, you looked at your LinkedIn profile, and you see if you know any people there, and then, take that job rec, you always want to do a qualified submission, because it's so hard to find jobs that you're highly, a match for. So when you do so, you want to make the most of it. And that's why you want to make the case with the resume and do the T letter. And then, as Mark said, and Alex pointed out in his story, you want to see if you could get that intro directly into the hiring manager, because that's really where you distinguish yourself, and where you'll be able to have the best opportunity or probability of landing. So at a very high level, that's what you need to get your mindset back into and start working, from targeting and identifying the companies and the positions all the way through to a qualified submission. And then for the cherry on top of the cake, get the introduction if you can, and then that should lead to a higher probability of success.
Just I'm going to build on that, because Anne-Marie, you asked this earlier, and I think your question kind of ties in this too. And I'm sure we might be able to have a debate about this, but I don't want to. But do I post that I'm out? Do I post that I'm looking, right? Because I see folks do that all the time, right? When they get laid off, they want to let their network know. So I think I'm actually in favor of it, in a way that if you craft that thought leadership or that post in a way that's, not sour grapes, but I'm on to the next thing. Looking forward to, where I'm going to take my talents, where I'm going to take my experience. But what I think it does when I see that on LinkedIn, I just had this happen with a senior executive with one of the nation's leading banks, so I know well. Within 2 seconds, I reached out to him. How can I help you? What can I do? If he didn't post that, I wouldn't have known he was even looking or out of work. So I don't know if Anne-Marie's got a thought on this, but I kind of like it, because maybe not every single person is going to jump and help this person, but if he didn't post that he was out of work, I never would have known. And I'm only one person, but within seconds, I connected him with 5 executive recruiters. He had meetings with them within 24 hours. And he just told me yesterday he's already got 2 or 3 job interviews. But if he didn't just post simply, hey, no longer my company, looking for the next thing. And again, it was a positive post. It wasn't, man, I can't stand my former company. They laid me, right? But within seconds, I just texted him and we were off and running. And I'm sure I wasn't the only person that did that. But if he never posted, I never would have even known he was out of work, and wouldn't have been able to help him because I wouldn't have known. So I like that. I don't know if anyone else has an opinion on posting when you're kind of out and you're looking for the next thing, but there could be some positive comes out of it, which I think.
Can I ask one more question?
You just did.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
No, Mike, he was just teasing you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm still in a bad place. It's only been 2 days.
I'm sorry. I just heard you ask a question. If you can ask a question, that's all.
In the meantime, would it be phony of me, because I don't want to be phony, would it be phony of me, I have roughly 550 contacts, to reconnect with people and just say, hey, I'm looking for a job? Or is that, I don't know, not authentic, for lack of a better way of explaining it?
I would suggest you just say you're reconnecting with them.
Okay.
Just say, I want to catch up with you, see how you're doing. And in the course of you guys talking, you can share that you're out looking right now.
Okay.
But that's
Yeah,
why, I get friends telling me all the time, Frank, I'm so bad at this. I'm happy that you reconnected with me. And I'm not reconnecting with them for a job. I'm literally just reconnecting with them. But that's what all of us need to do. I suggest you guys go down even your contacts on your smartphone, and every now and then work your way down the list and talk to those people that you haven't talked to in a while, just to reacquaint yourselves with them and see how people are doing, and shoot the breeze a little, and catch up on each other's life. And it's actually very enjoyable because you connected to these people because you like them in the first place. So go out there and make it a regular habit to do so. And then, make sure you're connected to them on a platform like Facebook. Every time they have a birthday, wish them a happy birthday. It's a really simple thing to do. And, make it genuine and authentic so it doesn't feel phony. And you'll be surprised then when you post something out there, they are more than willing to reciprocate and, fulfill their side of the relationship.
I'm going to share also two stories. One, years ago, I guess, when I was in job search and I was first in the Breakfast Club, one of the members had made an announcement similar to what Frank was describing, that he would send out an email about every 1 or 2 months to his email network. It's a little harder to do in LinkedIn now than it used to be. But basically saying, this is what's up with me. And it wasn't a begging kind of thing. And so I started doing that at that time. I'm not job hunting anymore. And I got feedback or thanks for connecting. And it then facilitated discussions with people that I long lost, including at that time a former coworker from 17 years prior. And we picked up right from where we left off. So I think it could be very powerful. The other one, and this is more of a silly example, but it demonstrates the same thing. About a week ago, my mother's email was hacked by however it got hacked. And a message went out from her email account that was kind of friendly. It wasn't a phishing message per se, but it was certainly very frustrating. I reached out to my mother right away to let her know that. She was getting email responses in the next day or two from people that she had lost touch with. And now she's got 2 coffee meetings. They're just old friends. Now, my mom is, retired, whatever. The message there is it works. Reach out to people. It worked for me. Apparently, it worked for my mother. People are happy to reconnect. They may not have even thought of you in a while. Nothing wrong. It just time goes by. So yeah, leverage it, and you'll also be doing something that other people aren't doing. So it may keep you, at the top of the resume list or the top of the communication list.
Thank you.
Yeah. Or at the very least, what have you got to lose? Someone won't reply. So it's a good tip for
Nothing to lose.
good,
Nothing to
yeah, good question and a good tip for all of us. So yeah.
low risk, high reward. I go back to, again, I just go back to this executive who 2, 3 weeks ago, lost a job, and by simply posting on LinkedIn, I'm sure not just me, but I'm sure many people who he had worked with 5, 10, 15 years ago reached out to him, said, how can I help? And if he didn't post it, none of us would have known.
And you also never know which connection is the link to your next job. There's a gentleman that a lot of us in the job support community know, Marty Latman. He's been to this group many times as well. He's a leader in the job seeker support area, and he had lost his job and then midweek went for a haircut, which caught his barber off guard because normally he would have been working, and happened to complain that, well, I lost my job. Well, it turns out the barber connected him with someone who connected him with his next job, right? Getting a haircut leads to a job. You just never know. Talk to somebody online. If the supermarket line is moving a little slow, make a comment. Gee, I should have gone to the self-checkout line and see if that leads to discussion. You have no idea.
I'll give you one story from my own that brings all of these points together with the networking, with the 6 degrees of separation, etc. Years ago, Rod Cologne used to be very prevalent at our group, and my former boss, Ruth Herringer. Together, they formed a team where they were delivering the ExecuNext sessions to people for job search and career management. And they reached out to me one day and they said, Frank, we're going to have the session in your town. Would it be possible for you to come out and join in the conversation tonight? And I said, sure, I have availability. I'll be there. So I come in and I'm helping everybody and, telling them, my perspectives and all from the Breakfast Club. And one guy in particular, he needed a little bit extra help. So I took the time, I sat with him, and we probably stood an hour after the meeting, with me helping him, and he was very thankful. And he says to me, well, what can I help you with? And I said, well, really, I don't need anything. And he kept, pushing on me. He says, no, I feel really compelled because, I want to help you back in some way. And he says, well, what's going on in your life? I said, well, I'm fully employed, but I am going with this other company through an interviewing process. And I was at the 17th round of interviews. I mean, it was so crazy because I initially applied for one job and I got sent all the way up to the CIO to be given it. And then when I got to him, he said, good news and bad news. He says, you're not getting the job you're being interviewed with. He says, I want you to work directly for me instead. So then I had to go on another track with a whole new set of people for interviews. And he had basically selected me, and I was going to the next day with the president of the company for the final interview. So he says, well, what company is it? And I told him. And he says, the guy you're going to meet with was my college roommate. You just never know what that other person has. That's why you got to network. You've got to engage in these conversations, and you'll be shocked at the things that will come your way.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks. Any more thoughts or questions for Mark and Frank while they're here? Otherwise, we'll formally end the meeting, and we'll keep the session open to have more discussions for anyone who wants to hang around. The basic difference between ending the meeting and not ending the meeting is we just turn the recording off. That's all. We like to keep some of this Q&A in the recording because it could be helpful as you revisit the recording later on.
Right. I just have one more question, and maybe Mark is most helpful with it. How many interviews, or what's the interview process like nowadays? You mentioned one that there's like 5 interviews. Can you give us a sense of what it is right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure others can weigh in on this as well. I think it's case by case, company by company, right? It varies. There's some interviews now that begin with, I call them robots. That's not probably the correct term. Alex or someone else will give us the term, but where you're not even interviewing with a human, right? It's a timed interview where you're, answering questions, and at some point somebody's going to look at those answers and hopefully respond. But at least what I'm saying is, a human recruiter or human HR person or someone on the inside of the company has, as we said earlier, gone through all these resumes and picked 12 or 15, and you're one of those 12 or 15. So first is the recruiter, could be by phone and or some sort of video conferencing, usually not in person, that first one. If it's phone, and I know we all know this and it's obvious, but as I told my students, if it's phone, they can't see you. They can't see how you're dressed. They can't see if you're slouching. They can't see if you're standing at attention. So all they're judging on is your voice, your attitude, your confidence, your articulation, your enthusiasm, your excitement, right? All those things. That's all. Because at the end of the day, After that, if it's a phone call, the recruiter's going to say either, I liked how she sounded, or I didn't like how he sounded, right? They can't see you. And so based on that audio, I like how she sounded. I want to bring her to the next round, right? So now we go from 15 to, I don't know, 10 candidates. And then that next one is probably in today's world is probably still on Zoom. And it may be with any of those levels we talked about. It could be someone senior, it could be a middle-level manager, who knows what it could be. But at least from the lately, I mean, just over the last month or two or three, all the folks who I've kind of am helping with who are in different roles, 3, 4, 5. I haven't heard any 17s like Frank. 3, 4, 5. The two that I think I referenced, one with I referenced two that are all happening right now on Monday. One with a major media company. The other one is also with a major entertainment brand. Both of their final interviews are in person on Monday, and those are the only in-person interviews. Everything else up to this point has been phone, Zoom, 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 and then, so I think each of them are in like a 4th or a 5th interview. So that's kind of what I'm hearing, but you also hear stories of interview that goes on for months and months and months. But I think typically I'm hearing about 3, 4, 5, probably phone, Zoom, those kind of things. That's what I'm hearing, at least from all my recent anyone I've been helping with in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 months.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Well, Mark, Frank, thank you so much for, well, certainly for Mark being a continued supporter of and presenter for the Breakfast Club. Frank, it goes without saying, you're the founder, co-founder of the group, our current president and leader, the force behind us. And of course, we are ever grateful for your support as well. But always glad when Mark is able to join us with great information.